So yeah, so I never walked away. I was always conscious in what I listened to. I loved my rock and metal and stuff like that. I would always try and find more positive stuff to, um, I can go in depth about that and about the spiritual aspect and the vibrations, the energy, and that each music produces. But that'll be another time. I think so. With my faith, it was always there. Wasn't until my teenage years where I did feel tested a lot about my faith and my walk with God, because when you feel alone and no one understands you, the only one that understands you is Christ. And in saying that is that it wasn't just religion, it wasn't just about going to church, it wasn't just, reading his word and stuff. It was an actual walk with God where you talk with him and he speaks back to you in your heart and your spirit, and you start to recognize his voice. It says that in his word that my sheep will know my voice. And it's like with anything, when you spend time with someone, you get to know their characteristics and their voice and how they are. So the more you spend time with Jesus and learn about him in the scripture, you you start to recognize him and know his characteristics and his nature of who he is. And you know that when things happen in your life, you know that, okay, this isn't of God because it's out of his character. um, that can be a debate in itself, and I'm more than happy that there'll be people on here that probably want to have more questions or want to ask me questions and will challenge me in some things, and that's okay. We can have a platform like that, and you can message me, just message me, and I will do my best to answer those questions. Um, so I think, so through my teenage years, I did have to learn to rely on Jesus more than anyone else, where my relationship with him got to a point where I, you walk home, because I used to walk everywhere. You walk home, and it'll start to rain, and you're like, Lord, I just pray you keep this rain up until I get home. And all the time it happens. It stops, and then it's just like just 20 meters into the home, it buckets down the rain, and you just sprint in there and you run, and it's just like, God, you have a sense of humor, don't you? So it's just, you got to understand that God, he's not just in awe and just all powerful, in that he's personal and he's a friend as well. So when you understand his humor and his love, you just like, oh my gosh, what am I doing? Like sometimes you'll be watching a movie, you'll be reading something, then all of a sudden God will drop something in your spirit, and you'll start laughing like, oh, that's pretty funny. He'll share something with you. And so at that early age, I did develop that, and that wasn't because, I think it was through circumstances that I went through, pushed me into that, where I could discover more on God and who he is. So that built my relationship with him. And there were times when I had dreams and visions when I was younger. Um, some things I can go into depth later, because there's a lot to it. But I've always had that heart for people, and um, you can say like a father's heart. And so what I say, I received, say, my salvation when I was at age of understanding. But when I was at a youth rally, when I was about 14, 14, 15, I went to a youth rally, and I went up, just some prayer and stuff, as leaders were there, and that it was like a town away. And I remember just there, and I just got hit, and I just felt this crazy energy of just love. And I remember I was just on the floor, and I heard sound was like 50%. So it was like muffled, and I felt like I was sinking in the floor. And I had no drugs or nothing. You know, I was still young, I didn't experience all that. So I was there and I could just feel it was like a river. It was just like someone turned a tap on. I could feel this woof, 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 and I was like, what the heck's going on? And I just felt love. I felt peace. I felt joy. And I didn't want to leave it. I did not want to go away. And I remember that so vividly. And as I came out of it, just the sound started to rise back up to 100% again. And then there was like dancing and bands playing and stuff. So it was like, whoa, that was an experience, you know. And I will never forget that day, that I believe that's when I was saved. And that's when I felt born again, where I just felt made anew in the spirit. And I went home, and I think a couple of months after, I remember being in my room and just spending time with God, just sitting there pondering. I used to listen to music all the time, like always had my headphones on, always listen to music. That's the way that I would connect with music. Is I express a lot through music, and I can really connect with it. Um, so I believe I have a deep understanding in that. I remember lying in my bed, and all of a sudden I started speaking another language, and I didn't ask for it. I didn't even try it. It was just as I was spending time with God, it just flowed out of me. And a lot of, you know, what the word says is that, you know, about speaking in tongues and stuff, and some people think it's quite funny, which I think when you see it from a outside perspective, I can see how it can be. It's meant to be a personal thing between you and God, and a witness of who he is. And obviously if it's in a public setting, there'll be interpretation. It's usually another language from some other language for a specific purpose. But you know, I see it as that it edifies your spirit and builds you up in your spiritual. You know, you've got food that you have for your natural, for your body, that keeps you strong, and then there's a spiritual food as well, where I see reading the Word, spending time with Jesus, and speaking in a language where I feel connected with Him, without being too spiritual or spiro, just being real, honest, and raw. That this is this is my life, this is my walk, and I'm not going to shy away from it. You know, I haven't really shared much about myself. Like people that I've tattooed, I'll share a little bit, um, but I am led when I feel to share. I will share with someone where I feel if I need to say or just encourage. You know. So that was my teen life where I got that. So I did youth group, had so much fun at youth group. I went to some camps, like the camps in New Zealand are crazy, where they're on the farms. I remember we went onto a mud run, so we were covered in mud, like up to the waist of there. We would have to pull in a rope to get through the mud. That was so much fun. Sometimes, you know, there was a rumor of, you know, that there was a dead sheep in one of the things, so it was pretty funny. But it was great, you know. So some good memories there. You know, there was a game that we would play, couch steel, where it would be a bunch of us, and we would have a couch that we needed to carry from one place to another. So we were in town, and we had to get it to another destination. And there'll be these spotters where we will be carrying the couch, and the spotters, if they see us, we have to see them first, and if we see them first, we jump on the couch, like we hide it, and then we don't get spotted. If we get caught running with the couch, then we get a penalty. So it was like whoever's there first. And I remember this time one of the leaders knew a copper, so they actually organized this policeman in uniform to go around and try and spot us. So we're like running away from the cops. So it was fun, you know, it was fun as a kid, you know. So we had some really fun memories and doing stuff like that. Oh, but you know, so it was really good. And I remember when I left school, that's when you start to discover more about yourself, where in a way I was under reliant on my parents' faith to a point where I had ventured out and I started pursuing God more in a deeper level. And I remember so through a lot of my life, I had a lot of near-death experiences. And I personally believe that whatever you want to call it, I call it the devil, I call it the enemy, try to take me out a lot of times. And by the grace of God and His mercy, that I'm still here alive speaking to you today. I can go in more detail with that, about each aspect on that, but the one that I would say that was a pinnacle in my life was when I left school, and when I was about 18, 19, probably about 19, I had a near-death experience where I was, basically I drowned. Like I've always been a good swimmer, you know, I surfed and I skated most of my teenage years, but I was on these rocks and I didn't have the right footwear, and I slipped and whacked my head, and I stood up and I fell unconscious, and I fell into the water, which was quite a few meters high off some pillars, and I was caught in an undertow and I was floating out to sea. So I had 60% of seawater in my lungs. I was unconscious for over a minute. Um, I was in a drug-induced coma on morphine for about 3, 4 days. So I had a tube down my throat that was breathing. I had injections on the side that were giving me antibiotics and everything like that. Um, it was crazy because I remember my friend and another fisherman, because I was actually doing some fishing with a friend. Um, they went and grabbed me they just pulled me in by the feet, and I remember they got me to it, and I was just sitting on the rocks and the waves are just washing up against me. I was just spewing out all this water, all dazed. And to know how rocky it was, there was about 5 to 6 firemen that had to get me up. Um, that's how rocky it was. And um, yeah, it was very full on. I do remember thanking the ambulance officers on the way to the hospital. um, as you do, you know. Hi man, thanks, bro. um, so I did that, and then I remember, like, when I was there, it was pretty intense. There was a time when I was in intensive care, and I could sense death. I could sense just death around me, the eeriness, the coldness about it. My heart rate went so low, it was under like 40 beats per minute, so the alarm kept going off. Because I was that drugged up in morphine and everything. And my doctor told me that I was the first patient to ever survive that condition. So I was like, far out, man. You know, it was just crazy. And I remember when I was in recovery in the ward, so I wasn't drugged up. I was just there, eating again, learning to breathe properly. And there was a time when I was just listening to some peaceful music, and I had a vision, a real intense vision. And I cannot describe how peaceful and beautiful this was. But I remember I was in this immaculate garden, and the flowers are beautiful. It would just look like it was looked well, like really well. You can see light reflecting off all angles. There was no shadow. You could stand on the grass and it will spring back up, like there was no depth, nothing there. And I just felt warmth, and I felt like I belonged there, and I felt loved. And I looked to my right side and I saw Jesus. I kid you not, I saw him. And from his waist down, I remember I saw it from waist down, and I recognized it was Jesus because in his hand there was that hole. There was that marking there, that hole. And he didn't say anything to me. It was just, he was present there, and I looked down to his feet and I saw that. And it was just for like a split second, and it was just, I felt like I was going to be okay, that I was going to be reassured, like I was reassured and know that I was going to be okay. Little did I know that 2 weeks prior to my accident, there were women that were praying for a situation that was going to happen. They believed they said to my mother that God put on their heart to keep praying and interceding, that they could see that the enemy, that the devil, whatever you want to say, was trying to fight over my life. They didn't know who I was at that time. They just saw fighting. So they were praying and interceding. So the power of prayer, people, is important. So when I was in hospital, they knew my mother. So they called my mother and said, look, we've been praying. God told us that we've been praying 2 weeks before it happened. So your son is going to be okay. And when you know that how much God cares, that he goes to that length, that you know you have a purpose, even though when you don't fully understand it or discover it yet. And I can say that there's many of us that can relate, that we've had near-death experiences that we should have been dead, you know, and by the grace of God that we are here. And it's like, why? Because we have a purpose and a calling on our life, and it's not my time. So that was very powerful thing, and I will never forget it. The support I had from friends, family, even my ex-girlfriend came back, but that was another. um, but it was just powerful, like, because it wasn't just that instance. There's been many instances since our birth, since then. That time when I was a kid, being close to being hit by a car. Over here in Australia, where I've been in a crazy accident where I was T-boned. Only by the grace of God that I'm here in one piece. There's been times we've been almost driven off the road, and I kid you not, my angel would have been battered and bruised, you know. So, you know, and I'm still discovering who I am and my identity. Um, you know, I tried to find my identity in other things, in how I looked and my tattooing and the music and what I would wear and dress and everything like this. And I tried to create this identity of how I wanted people to perceive me, of who I was. And it was a false identity. And